Let's start off with talking a little bit about our author. And Sally Andrews lives in a mud brick house on a nature reserve in
Hmm.
Klein Karoo. I'm not sure if that's pronounced right, but South Africa with her partner and other wildlife. But she spent a lot of time in the wilderness, and she has a master's in adult education. For some decades, she was a social environmental activist, and then she became a manager for Bowden's art business, and then she settled down to write full time. A couple of things I thought was interesting. She said she sits on a bench welcoming the morning light unto the hills of the Klein Karoo. And then she uh, settles down somewhere with my laptop and earmuffs so that she puts the sound out. But I was looking at this particular book and why. And she said, I wanted to write about love. It intrigues me, and I think it's the ultimate act of braver and perhaps more foolish than walking into leopard caves. But I find romance books a bit boring. I enjoy the old style murder mysteries, Agatha Christie, Dick Francis, and Earl Gardner. And I love the way that food can transport a reader. And so she said, I thought of an advice column would be a fun way to explore the theme of love in a variety of flavors. It also had potential for humor, and I wanted a lovable character who was down to earth but also a bit quirky. I wanted to write something feel good and funny. One of the things that was interesting is that she studied a lot of contemporary crime books to get an idea of what was selling and what wasn't. She said most were fast paced and full of icky violence and disturbed sex, not much beauty, and so she wanted to write about beauty of the place. And she said the biggest research she did was the food because she does not. She said I do enjoy cooking and eating, but I'm no expert, and I had never read a recipe book.
Oh my
So
goodness.
she said, I
Wow.
knew very little about Afrikaans cooking, that
Wow.
Tante Maria was specialty. So I enlisted an aid of numerous amateur and professional chefs to create and test the best possible versions of Tante Maria recipes. And then she said they had tasting parties and everybody would decide which ones were the moan out delicious ones. And she said, I think the book has benefited from my initial cooking ignorance because it meant I had to study the field really deeply and not just include my own family recipes. So that was kind of interesting. That, and she said, if I have to reduce Tante Maria's lessons to one sentence, I would say the message is open your heart, which I think is
Oh.
very true of Tante Maria.
I'll just add two little tidbits that I've learned just in the last couple of weeks. So since our failed book club last month, so again, another reason maybe it was meant to be delayed. One is that there are some now I'm not a cook at all. So I wouldn't have known this if I wasn't following Sally Andrew, but there's a very prestigious cookbook award that happens in Europe every year. It's called the Gourmand Cookbook Award.
Mm-hmm.
And she was actually in Portugal last month. And yeah, her book won one of the categories, her cookbook, because she's actually done
really?
not the novel. She's actually done a companion cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Wow.
companion cookbook won one of the categories in this very prestigious cookbook award.
Yeah.
I didn't know that she'd never read a cookbook before she started this writing journey. So that's an interesting little twist.
It is. Wow.
The other thing is I posted about this. I've got an author newsletter that I send out, and I included some information about this book club. And when one of my subscribers sent me an email, and he's somebody that, I mean, I haven't seen him in 40 years or something, but he was somebody who I met through political activism in South Africa back in the apartheid years. And he said to me, Andrew. Now, I didn't know this either. He said, Andrew, is that the Sally Andrew that was in the ANC Women's League back in the 80s and 90s?
Oh.
And so ANC was Nelson Mandela's party.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I asked her, and it turns out it was. He said, yeah, she used to come to the meetings with her two Rhodesian Ridgebacks, which are these huge dogs. And she had these two dogs that she used to bring to the meetings, and that's why he's always remembered her. So I've probably even been in the same room as her, decades ago, and I didn't even know.
And back then, she didn't know either.
And
Yeah.
she didn't know either. Yes.
Yeah.
None of us could
You
have
know-
looked forward and seen what 40 years ahead would look like.
Well, and I think I'm excited because you are from South Africa. We've had a couple of people that have traveled. The story is set in South Africa, and our first question is, have you ever been? Which now we know several have. And is the setting, does it feel familiar to your travels? So let's talk about those who have. So first of all, who's been to South Africa before? Okay, a
Five of
few of
us.
you, quite a few. Yeah. Okay. So did you find it familiar looking or feeling in any way?
Yes, it was interesting because when I was in South Africa, we spent half our time in Cape Town, which obviously this was not an urban setting
Yeah.
at all. It also didn't have what I remember in Cape Town, it didn't have we call them in Texas colonias, the neighborhoods of the different races and everything. It seemed like where she was much more integrated, what I remember of South Africa, but maybe not. But the
And
countryside, yes, we did go to a game park that was out in that region, and yeah, it felt very familiar when she talked
I
about
have
this.
to say, I wondered about the
Mhm.
integration as I watched the thing before I even read the book.
Yeah.
And I got more information about how that felt to the people, to the script writer, than from the book. It was not quite as, if anyone has seen both, but I did wonder about that because I have not been to South Africa. But in that village, it seemed like there was almost no differentiation.
Mhm.
So there would be, Ladysmith would have had the same racial segregations as the rest of the country. I come from Cape Town. And I've got to say the place it's a completely rural living in South Africa is very different, very, very different pace. It would have had the same classifications, and in fact, it may even have felt more segregated in the older days. Now I haven't lived in South Africa for 17 years, although I do go across every couple of years. So anything I say today, is dated. But what you would probably find in Ladysmith, as in most of South Africa, is that there are no longer any laws about who can live where. But of course, there is a huge generational kind of inertia on it. So you will still have neighborhoods that are predominantly a specific race, although, as the years pass, that's kind of changing a little bit. But the actual town center would be much more integrated. And even in a smaller town, in a village, you would have that. So people will still be working together, right? And they'll still be, to some extent, going to schools and churches and so on. Although, again, if those are located in the neighborhoods, they're likely to be racially, one or other particular racial group. But once you are kind of in the middle of town where everyone's going to work, you have much more integration. So, yeah.
Was it just the author pushing the boundaries? Because there were a couple of interracial relationships. Sorry, couldn't get that out in the book and in the video too. So I'm wondering, was that her pushing the boundaries, or is that valid?
No, that's normal.
Okay.
That's normal. I mean, 20 years ago, my fiance was Black. So, but I mean, look, when I say it was normal, it used to be against the law. It wasn't.
Right.
When I say it was normal, you will still probably, you will still probably find that most relationships do have people from a single race group, but it's not like people won't stare at you in the streets if if your husband is Black or whatever. So no, those were completely normal. And the holdovers, I think, are just more that kind of, as I say, that generational inertia. And then because neighborhoods tend to be one race group, then if a school is located in that neyborhood or a church is located in the neighborhood. So we've probably got decades and decades and decades and decades to go before you have like completely natural integration. But it felt the way she spoke about race, when I was reading it, Wendy can tell you, I actually sent a very concerned email to her and Carolyn. And I was like, the first time I read this book, I just loved it. But now that I'm reading it with JourneyWoman in mind, I'm like really, really worried. I overthought everything, about how race is spoken about in the book, how frequently racial kind of ethnic identification is almost the first thing people notice about characters in the book. That is all very normal for how things are in South Africa, but it's not necessarily, I mean, of course, in some cases it is hugely prejudicial, but it's not necessarily prejudicial to have that kind of approach.
One of the things, and of course, I have not been to South Africa. I have been in many, many small villages, though. And what really surprised me, and between the book and the TV series, and probably the TV series is probably much more realistic, but I was expecting it to be much more foliage. I wasn't expecting it to be such a dry, flat land. I was expecting it to be, full of trees and bushes and shrubs, and yet it was really very arid. And so that really surprised me.
The Karoo is the semi-desert area.
Yeah.
So it's not sandy desert like the Sahara, but it has always had serious water shortages and is the vegetation is adapted to that. And I love the scenery in the series because that is the Karoo. But yes,
and I think the fact that she lives there, it makes a big difference because you can see that she has that love for it, and so when she writes about it, she does a very good job in it. So, okay, so what were some of people's favorite passages in the book? I'll go first. And I'll explain why this passage to me struck me very much because it's talking about the day of Mandela's funeral. And what struck me about it is, let me first read it. The day of Mandela's funeral was an unofficial public holiday. I was surprised that even Ladismith took the day off to honor him. 20 years here. Let me just skip down. I met up with Jesse and Hattie at the Ladysmith Hotel, and the bar was full of people watching the funeral service on the big screen television. The hotel served coffee and biscuits at no charge and had brought in a whole bunch of white plastic chairs alongside the usual wooden ones. The curtains were closed so we could see the TV nicely. The reason why I liked this passage, I happen to have been in England. I arrived in England the day of Diana's funeral. And my friend and I, we drove down to Salisbury, and well, first of all, we went to lunch, and everybody, because the funeral was during the day, all the bars were packed with people watching the funeral. And I remember thinking how strange that is. We're going to a bar, having a drink, having some lunch, and watching the funeral. And this is kind of what I saw here. It's like the collective action of the community in mourning. And so that's what it really reminded me of, was that whole time, and how the community does come together for those kinds of things. So, anyway, other people's favorite passages. Yeah, Mary.
This is one of many that I found humorous, and I loved when I was laughing out loud at some of the different things she was saying, or she was writing. But one of them was, and the answer to these letters was always a recipe. So someone wrote to her that I'm in love, but the problem is I get so excited that it's over in 2 minutes, and she doesn't get a chance to be fulfilled. And then the author writes back, well, what you need to do is memorize a good recipe and just keep thinking about it, and it will delay. Then the other one that I told it to several people because I thought it was so funny. This woman writes in and says she gets beaten frequently, but what really put her over the edge was when her husband complained that her curry wasn't very good. Do you have a recipe for a good curry so that he won't be upset that the curry doesn't? I just thought that was, sad that she's getting beaten, but it just, the irony of it. So that's
yeah.
the reason I like those, those different passages, because throughout the book, I just liked laughing is what it was.
I've
You know, I think-
decided I can't read any more of them because I read the second one, and at some point, and I won't do any spoilers, but things happen and she feels upset, and she said her whole life feels upside down. And so she goes home and makes a pineapple upside down cake. And I did it. I was like, I'm depressed. I made the pineapple upside down cake. And it was just like her. I just sat there and ate the thing. Oh,
Do all of her books have recipes? Is that a theme through all of them, or just?
That's her. It's called Recipes for Love and Murder. And part of my attraction is I love to cook. So I wanted to see what this was about. And so that is, even though I'm shocked she never had read a cookbook, and I read about her, she doesn't cook or hadn't cooked. But because tying it in, I was going to try it. There's been other mystery books with recipes that are so hokey I can't read them. But this one, she's good.
Yeah.
She's good.
Yeah.
So it's not hokey, I don't think.
Yeah.
Well, sort of her answer to everything was bring a cake, bring a pie, So,
make a
anybody else have a
stew.
favorite passage
Sorry.
they want to share?
Yeah, I do.
Patty. Okay, Patty.
This is in chapter 1, page 1 almost, and she says,
Yeah.
but maybe life is like a river that can't be stopped, always winding toward or away from death and love. I just thought that summed up the book so nicely in the first page. It came back to it.
Yeah.
I like that
Very
one.
nice. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Tani Maria, which Tani means auntie, for those of you who don't know, explains that I taste in Afrikaans and I argue in English. But if I swear, I go back to Afrikaans again. Do you have a similar relationship with any non-English languages?
I can swear in a couple of languages.
Yeah, me too. I can remember when I was doing my field school in archaeology, every pit had 2 people in it, and there were 2 people from South Africa. Hilhard Brinslow was one of them, and he was my pit mate. And he was always saying, "Oh, drat those bloody bees, drat those bloody bees." That was all he said all summer long, was drat the bloody bees. So I always think of that when I think of swearing in Afrikaans. But I
Just
think,
a quick question though.
yeah,
And I'm asking this of Sally. Can you pronounce Tante?
Tani. Tani.
Tani.
It rhymes with
Tani.
bunny, like bunny rabbit.
Okay.
Tani.
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 Tani
Okay,
Maria, yeah.
Yeah.
So it
Tani.
means auntie, but it's also a term of respect for an older person who you
look
know,
up to.
whether you know them well or not. We use, and there's actually one place in the book where she talks about that, and she says there's a similarity between the closer speaking people and the Afrikaners, being that everyone is family, and that was when there was a woman that calling people Sisi, which means sister or mama. That's not Afrikaans. That's Zulu.
Well,
Sorry, Xhosa. So yeah, it's a term of respect.
But what about even if we take her statement, I taste in Afrikaans?
I love that.
I love that. I mean, I think about things I taste. Where do my taste buds really come alive? What really makes me live? Is what flavors, and where are you when you're tasting this? What you taste in. So
I think we have a lot of
Go
sorry.
ahead, Heidi.
Oh, I think we have a lot of memories associated with taste. So maybe it's something our grandmother used to make. My father's Austrian, and so as he gets older, he reminisces through food. And he reminisces, trying to find recipes to make recipes. Oh, this is how my mother used to make it. I mean, he's 85 years old, but yet he still goes back to what his mother made when he was 9 years old, and he's trying to find those recipes. And I think smells and tastes are very familiar to us based on what our family members made or what we remember from childhood. And I think for our whole lives, we'll go back to those things.
Yeah, I think it's true. There's certain dishes of my mom's or my dad's, because my dad was a big cook. That flavor, I know I can never I can never repeat that. But it takes me back to them, or that smell of cooking in the kitchen. Very, very distinct. How did people feel about the Afrikaans words that were sprinkled throughout the story? Were you able to figure out what they meant? Was their meaning clear? Were you able to find it from context? This is another thing that Sally and I had a big discussion about, was the Afrikaans language. Yeah.
I found it
Yes.
distracting
You
that
found it distracting?
I didn't know what they were. So there
Mhm.
is a dictionary at the back of the book. So having to go back and look at it again, that broke up the dialogue, the text of the book.
Okay. Anybody else?
I
Linda?
flipped back and forth quite a lot, and then after a while, like it started to seem more familiar. So I
It's like
stopped.
an accent. You get used to an accent. Yeah.
See, and I just took it in context as I went through.
Yeah.
I just kind of went, okay, this makes sense. So I never bothered to check and see if I
Yeah,
was
me too.
on point or not.
Yeah, Linda, that's what I
Elena?
did. I just went through. Elena.
I listened to the book.
Me too.
Oh,
The narrator was very good. She also had a South African accent. And so some of the words really threw me. I got a lot of it by context. But there was one thing that was confusing to me for a big chunk of the book, especially when, the woman who was beaten worked at the spa, I believe is the way they pronounce it. If they pronounce it spa. And I
Yes.
turned out that it was a grocery store, and I'm thinking it's a spa for half the book. Whether the actual store was like spar, but they didn't say the R.
Oh, okay.
But I couldn't see the words, so it was like, I finally thought, why are they buying apricots at the spa?
And that was very
That's
familiar
funny.
to me because they have spars in Ireland, and I've been to a number of spars in Ireland, so that was familiar to me.
It's
That's funny. Okay.
And it's funny, if you think she worked in a spa, you have a certain image of who this person is compared to working at a grocery store. That really changes the thing. Fanny Maria presents a very simple character at the beginning of the story. Do you think she developed as the plot progressed?
I think
Yeah,
more was
I do.
revealed.
I
I think,
Let's see. We'll go with Elena first, and then we'll go to Judy.
That's okay.
I do, because I think in the beginning, she did not have really a lot of confidence in herself, especially when they asked her to do this advice column. And so the only way she could do it and feel competent was to tie it in with food. And I don't know if you remember the very first letter she got, which I listened to it, a little bit of it again today. And that very first letter was from this young girl who was only 13. Do you remember? Who was apparently having a relationship with a boy, playing a game that was rather sexual. Do you remember that? And she had her make the frozen chocolate bananas to satisfy her longing for this boy. But I think as the plot developed, she was so concerned about this other woman because of similarities, background, the fact that she was beaten and the other woman was beaten, that she just slowly defied especially the police lieutenant, or whatever his title was, because she really wanted to solve this and to help this woman. So I think she developed quite a bit.
I do also, because I remember in the beginning, I thought she was silly. She'd say things and I'm like, what? And then as the book went on, she developed.
Yeah.
And I think
I
part,
also-
sorry, go ahead,
Right.
Judy. Sorry.
I think that she became more of aware of what she was capable of, is what I thought. And I know I'm mixing it because I can picture back to what I saw on the screen with who she was in the book. I have trouble separating that completely, to be honest. And it never got out of my brain what I had seen, even though I think I saw it a couple of years ago. But I was really struck by how she did mature and grow. And going back, I happen to agree with whoever said that they just use those words in context. I don't like to break up my reading with looking everything up. It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
So I was able to figure most of it out. Although when I went and looked at it, I had some words wrong, but not necessarily what it was about. But to me, she grew, but she also became aware of her own desires, which she had shut off completely. And I think that's a pretty critical part of what was happening to her in this book, because I didn't pick out any phrases, but there were phrases that talked about opening your heart, and she kept referring to that. And I mean, the author. And I think that's what both the food and her romantic longings, she was getting in touch with how the food made her open and help people open their hearts. That's what she was aiming at. So I did see a lot of growth because I don't think it had dawned on her quite to connect those two.
You bring up an interesting point, which goes into our next question, is what do you think about her relationship with food?
It was her comfort.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
It was her
comfort.
answers.
It was her
More than
comfort,
that.
and therefore she used it to comfort other people. It was.
Yeah, but she had to come up with specific recipes that spoke to what they were going through. And that's where her insight, as she spent time with it, became, at least to me, clearer that she could target, probably a little unrealistic from one letter you receive, that you can pick the exact right recipe, but it's part of the fun of the book and the whole story.
She showed her empathy through the food. I think it was a beautiful device, both just her as a character and as a kind of literary device, how that was the mechanism by which she could relate to people.
It was like a language for her. That was her language. It's how she spoke. That's what her basic understanding of life had to do with the food. And she said some very wise things about, like when Judy said she had to, it goes kind of deeper than just the recipe. It meant more than just those ingredients, the way she put the two things together.
Well, and it's the way she showed love. She was always being a mother kind of person to everybody she was around. And, she kept the tin of cookies in her truck. She had the tin of cookies that went to the office. If something went wrong, she was making something to help lift spirits. So it was her version of showing love to people.
Her dependency on food is interesting as well, because her and I think this goes to the last question too, about how she develops in the book, because I think it's not only that she develops, but it's also that we become more aware of the complexity of her backstory.
Yeah.
And a lot of her relationship with food makes sense when we understand the trauma that she comes from. And even the kind of language that the author uses at the beginning of the book is very simplistic and becomes slowly more complex as we get to know the character. And I guess, at the beginning, I was just, oh, this woman is an overeater. She's using food as a substitute for love, or, but as time goes by, one realizes it's a much more multi-layered relationship that she has with the food.
Now, the narrator frequently introduces other protagonists in terms of their ethnicity, using labels that may not translate well across cultures. How did you feel about this? And I think in particular, we use the word colored, which was used in South Africa in a much different way than it's used here. Yes.
But if that's valid on how South Africa is, then
I didn't feel uncomfortable with it once you realized, it's in a context, and I knew that for that culture, that was how they were speaking to one another. And once you knew the characters and who was speaking, I just kind of accepted it as that was normal and okay for them.
And I don't think she ever meant anything derogatory, or she never meant anything in a negative way in the language she used. I never felt that.
No, in fact, I thought it was a way of pointing out the diversity of the neighborhood, of her town, and how they all work together, which is pretty impressive.
Well, I thought, in terms of working together at the end when they found Jesse, how they all got together and were given tasks, and everybody was sent out to track footprints, whatever, track things. They really were on one team. It was pretty amazing, even though there were squabbles, personality squabbles between people.
Did any of you pick up on any ominous echoes of South Africa's apartheid years?
Well, there were still some characters that were definitely prejudiced.
Right, the guy at the supermarket.
The guy at the supermarket, was the first one come to mind, but there was definitely that. And then Jesse's boyfriend, I can't remember his name, but his family. That was an interracial relationship, and he was struggling with his family accepting her. So
It was also interesting in terms of labor relationships, because overwhelmingly in South Africa still now, farm workers and domestic workers are Black. And those are also two areas where, although there are now laws to protect people working in those areas, they're really, really difficult to enforce. So, and I think that came out in some of the relationships between, Grace and Lawrence and the white families that they worked for. Another thing that was really interesting for me is the issue. There were only a few comments here and there, but I grew up in the generation where all white boys were conscripted into the army for 2 years when they turned 18. And so anybody my age, that ended quite soon, that ended as soon as we had our first democratic election. But anyone kind of my age or older has that kind of background. And the army was used not for so much for international warfare as for, suppressing and oppressing the majority of the population. And so you had these kids that were put into these really, really brutal situations where they were propping up like violence from the government. And that leads to, a lot of emotional scarring that won't go until those that generation passes. And that came out to me a few times in the book. Patty?
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember when they were talking about how Tony's husband had beat her, and how the other guy was beating his wife, and how they learned that in the military.
Yeah.
So you're talking about how the white boys of your age were indoctrinated in the military, but it seems like that wife beating thing. And she mentions time and time again that more than half or almost half of women in South Africa are abused by their husbands. And I don't know if that's still the case, but she does talk a lot about that off and on.
certainly not every man who served in the army is is a bad man. That would be oversimplistic. But I mean, I think, you take somebody and you take them at that age and you put them somewhere for 2 years in that kind of environment, and it's going to leave a mark of some kind. And it's also going to leave marks for the people who know that's what people went through. There was a quote in there. I've actually got it on my screen at the moment, where they were looking at a photograph of the guy who was beating his wife, and it says they were wearing the old South African army uniform.
Yeah.
Dirk was grinning, but the older guy had thin, straight lips. His pa looks like a mean bastard, said Jesse. And then Tani Maria says, thinks, my husband did his 2 years in that army. They didn't train them to be good men.
Right.
And that just gave me such a chill, because these are my brothers and my cousins and my friends and my and a lot of them are good men, but still, there's this haunts us, I think.
It also,
Dina,
sorry.
Dina,
Oh,
I think you said something to say. Yeah.
I
was
was going to say before that that just what you just said, that they are good people, but they've been forced to do things or led into situations where they're, in order to survive or to have their mates survive, they do things that are morally correct for them, but they're in a situation where they have to do it. And that's the situation of soldiers at war. But it's like the Vietnamese, the Vietnam War, where our things weren't really right. It wasn't right, and so there's more issues that they have long term. That becomes a bigger thing in the next book, in the Satanic Mechanic, that it's really dealt with. So, if you want to read that too.
Now, who here has seen the television series, and how do you think that the show compared to the book?
Except for one thing.
What's that?
The thing is, in the movie, they put a lot more backstory into her husband that had beaten her and died, and they made that whole a mini mystery in itself, and that didn't exist in the book at all.
That's in the second one, though, where you find that.
Okay.
In the first one, but the backstory in the movie is that she's from Scotland. She came over from Scotland.
Right.
From Scotland.
And I haven't figured out how they're gonna. Don't tell me how they're going to resolve that in the second book.
In the movie, though, I think she had inherited the house in South Africa from an aunt or something like that, and so she had South African heritage, but
She
had gone to
did.
Scotland and
But
got
she
married.
had
and the
lived
husband
in
was
Scotland, and that's relevant. I don't know how they deal with it in the second one. So they took some license with making it simplifying certain things that would be complicated to do on screen. Like she had one chicken instead of a whole bunch of chickens and stuff like that. But so they had to simplify and consolidate. So I'm very curious now to read the next book, since I saw both series. That fascinates me, though. That's just me.
It bothered me. It did bother me. Although I like Maria Doyle Kennedy, it did bother me that the Tani Maria character isn't more Afrikaans in the series. I loved the series. I really enjoyed it, and I found it stuck pretty close to the books. There were a couple of big. I mean, it was the same with the police guy. Instead of being an Afrikaner, was Tony Ngoro. But that didn't bug me so much because he was still very South African. But it did bug me a little bit that Tani Maria was somebody who, clearly had grown up overseas.
Oh, interesting.
But
Well, Go ahead, Judy.
I was just going to say that maybe because of your being from South Africa.
Yeah.
Because I was fascinated that a story had been written where it wasn't that. And I haven't been to Africa, but knowing that you're putting two different groups together and how close they could become. So I saw that a little differently than I think you saw it. But I can understand why you would see it. I totally get it.
So, what about what was your favorite recipe? And have you tried any of the food to prepare any of the food? And have you enjoyed any other books that have been centered around food like this? Yeah, Linda.
So I was very frustrated that and I can't remember her grandmother's Welsh rarebit recipe was not in the book. She fixed it more than once. I love it, but her recipe was not in the book.
Could you
Interesting.
say something about how the sauce has beer in it, and it has, like, she mentions a couple of like really
Right.
mustard, beer and mustard and something else and something else and something else, and I was thinking, that sounds good. But yeah, you're right, no recipe.
I
Dina.
think it's in the second book.
Oh, now
I think.
now I need to read it.
I think it might be in the second book.
Thank
And
you.
if it's not in the second book, it's probably in this cookbook that's just won an award.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
right. Yeah.
Has anybody tried any of the recipes from book one? Not the upside down cake from book two, but anybody tried any of the recipes?
I haven't tried it yet, but I wrote it out for the vodkek, the bread with the filling inside.
Fat cook. Oh, fat cook. It's so good. Fat cook is amazing.
Okay, well, I'm going to try that one. I have the recipe ready to try.
I want to try the chocolate cake because I have been told I have the best chocolate cake. So I'm going to make both of them, mine and hers, and see what people think, since the chocolate cake kept turning up over and over again.
Elena, you had your...
I want to know, I don't remember whether the recipe was there or not, but I want to know what a milk tart is, because Indiana, we have, well, Indiana's noted for what they call a cream pie, which is very similar. I mean, very simple. It's just like milk, eggs, and cream. And I mean, milk and cream and sugar cream pie is what it's called. And then in Portugal, I had this thing called a pastis.
Yeah.
Pastis, yeah.
It's not a pastis.
And it's very complicated to make because the crust is very difficult. So what is the milk tart?
It's kind of what is a milk tart? It's kind of like a custard tart, like a pie. So we tend to, if we talk about a pie, usually we're talking about a savory pie, like a meat pie.
Oh,
Different, I think, from you guys. Yeah. I mean, you get apple pie, but we also call apple pie apple tart. So a tart kind of more implies what I think you guys would call a sweet pie, like a pumpkin pie or something like that. And although I'd never heard about putting pumpkin in pies until I started reading American things. But yeah, so it's kind of filled with a sort of custard. It's very hard to explain, but I guess it's a kind of custard pie, I guess, for you guys. It's very delicious. And then usually it's got cinnamon dusted on top.
I'll have to look for a recipe.
This next question actually refers back to what I talked about at the very beginning. Was it in chapter 7 and 8? She describes how mourning the death of Nelson Mandela brings the townspeople of Ladysmith together. Have you experienced a similar moment when a community is united by an event that happens a long distance away?
I was in the Netherlands during May on a bike trip, and I don't know whether it's just the Netherlands, but the whole country stops for 5 minutes on Memorial Day. Like buses stop, restaurants stop serving, everything just stops to remember the fallen during the two wars. It was so moving. It really was. Like everything, the whole country. It's just, in America, that wouldn't happen. I just know that. And it was just unbelievable. Like the server, we were in a restaurant and the server came around and says, "We're going to stop for 5 minutes. If you want something, order it now, but we won't be serving from, I don't know what it was, 8 to 8:05 or 8 to 8:10, whatever it was. I don't remember the specifics. But trains, buses, it was moving, very moving.
Interesting.
We always had a full minute of silence on September 11th at school, though. When I was teaching, we always did.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do that or not, but
So my parents
Yeah,
lived in
unfortunately,
Berlin. My parents lived in Berlin during 9/11, and the outpouring of support for like the flowers and things that were laid by the U.S. Embassy, you know, in support of the U.S., even though it was in Berlin.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it's tragedies that bring communities together sometimes. How do you think the author used the landscape to enhance the story?
I
Well, I
found that
think,
there, yep.
but no, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I talk too much.
No, I talk too much, but I thought by having all these places out of town describing where people could go, the places they could hide, how they couldn't be tracked. Of course, we're so used to having, now we have GPS. Who knows, you can track almost anyone anywhere. But the landscape helped that in the book. Even though it may have been desolate in many ways, there were, and the animals helped. I thought she was really good at that. And I think that may have come from where she lives in this preserve, you know, and that's just a big part of her life.
I know when I watched the TV series, I mean, I read the book, but when I saw the scenery, I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, I had never seen anything like that ever. You know, and when they travel that road that I guess goes from the town to out of town, and it's just a single lane in the bare mountains, it's just like, oh my God, it's just amazing.
yeah, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
I loved hearing all the descriptions of the various birds and the bird calls.
Yes.
Too. Yeah.
She also with the mountains and the hills and so on, I noticed quite often how, because she'd have just these kind of a sort of a single descriptive paragraph or sentence just in amongst the action where Tani Maria would look up at the mountains, and it often reflected her mood.
Yeah.
So if it was a time where she was anxious or worried or you know, had read one of these letters that really disturbed her, you know, the mountains would be brooding and dark, and then there'd be another time where she was uplifted, and then it would be you know, suddenly it would be a more beautiful sight, and she'd see the mountains almost kind of as these benevolent presences. And so that seemed to happen, you know, at least half a dozen times through the book. I noticed that, and I thought that was interesting.
Well, what I think is interesting as a writer is that you could learn a lot from her, from the writer of this book, because she incorporates so many sensory details. She listens to chickens clucking, you know, and she watches their action. And she talks about being in the garden, and she talks about the smells of the food baking, and you know, whether the leaves are wafting in the breeze kind of thing. So she almost uses the landscape as another character, because she's describing. It's not like some books where the people are just moving around and you can't really picture where they are. But because I listened to it, I had to imagine. Well, of course, if you were just reading it, you would too. But I just thought that her writing was very, very rich in the fact that she incorporated all of these sensory details.
I've just pulled up because I think she also uses it to really quite subtly point out differences in character. So there was one place where Tani Maria, she goes and buys chicken pies. There's a little kiosk or something where she keeps on going to buy chicken pies, and the person who cooks there, who owns the place, is called Tani Kuruman. And when she finishes eating, she says, Tani Maria says, she's looking up at the mountains, and she says, "It's so dark up there," I said, when I had finished chewing, "in those mountain gorges." "Yeah," she said, "it's where the tall trees grow. When it rains, there are lovely waterfalls over the rocks." And so you had these two characters, and the one is looking up and seeing beauty. But at that time, and I can't remember exactly what was happening at that point of the story, but it was a dark time for Tani Maria, and she looked up and saw darkness.
Interesting. Well, I hate to say it, ladies, but we're almost at 8 o'clock. So I'm not going to ask, I'm not going to go through another question, but is anything else somebody wants to say about the book before we close out for the night?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Well, I'm going to say that I've almost finished. It's going to be next month's book, and it's terrific. It is really good. It's totally different than this. I mean, this one was really a very light book. This next book is much more complex, I think, is the way I would say.
When is
But
next?
it's next month, and it's called
Glassmaker.
Yeah, it's
I read-
interesting because it's like a sort of a multi-generational kind of saga of the people who make Murano glass in Venice.
Yeah.
But
except
it's got a funny little timey-wimey twist to it, which
It
I'm
does.
interested
It
to-
does.
I'll be interested to talk about it next month and see how people thought about that.
but it's very good, and I've learned so much about glass. It's just amazing.
And not in a boring way. It's
No,
it's
not at all.
And she
fascinating,
wrote The
so-
Girl with the Pearl Earring, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
that's,
she
yeah,
did.
I love her writing.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
So what do you read on the third Wednesday? Is that it every
Yes.
month?
Yeah,
Always the
And
third
I
Wednesday.
think the
And it
reason
should
I
be-
haven't come is
yeah,
because
it should
I
be
usually
every
have
other
something else.
yeah,
Oh.
it's typically every other month.
Oh,
But
okay.
see, we missed last month, so this was a makeup month. So
So we have got
Someday.
3 more for this year. So I'll actually and I've read 2 of them and they're both fabulous. I haven't read the third one yet. I'll just drop a link in the chat, especially for those people who aren't regulars,
Well, I
which
would love
will
to be a
show the
regular,
dates
but
in the book.
I really enjoy doing this, but I have a conflict on most of those times. So that would be because this is very enjoyable. I love reading, and this is great. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been lovely having you here.
yes. Well, in that case, until next month, happy reading, and we will see you then.
Thanks,
Bye,
Lady.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.